Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review. This movie is a horror film from Japan, Japanese language English subs, released in the year 2019, directed by Shion Sono, and this film is called The Forest of Love. So The Forest of Love is about a group of aspiring filmmakers. They're stuck for ideas, they don't know what to do, so they decide to take a video camera and document their everyday life, but that's very boring and they don't really see this as an opportunity to further their career or further their passion. So they're starting to get a little bit frustrated, but the frustration stops upon the arrival of an older man. Now, this older man is very mysterious. He's a bit of a weirdo, but he says that he has an idea for a movie of theirs. So this captivates them to the point of them wanting to spend time with him. But the more they spend time with him, the more they suspect that he might be the serial killer that's in the news. The news outlets are saying that this serial killer has killed a few people and the police have no idea who this killer is. And so the aspiring filmmakers believe, all right, this might be the guy. But instead of reporting him, they decide to follow him, and so they think this is the idea they've always wanted, and this puts them into a very, very awkward position because they are starting to be manipulated to the point where they're crossing a boundary of no return. So whether or not they are in danger and they can get their film finished is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on The Forest of Love. Coming into a Shion Sono film, I'm not really sure what I'm going to get. Now, I loved his movie, Why Don't You Play in Hell? I loved Cold Fish, but apart from those two movies, I really haven't been all that impressed. Is that, yes, I have seen very impressive qualities within this director, but I definitely think he gets lost in self-indulgence. That is a very unpopular opinion, because I know a lot of people like him, and each to their own, but if I'm being brutally honest, there are moments of brilliance, but as far as consistency is concerned, I just don't really think it's there. So I'm not sold on this guy. I don't know whether or not I genuinely like him, or if I am one of, not a fan of his. And so it is a very peculiar sort of director, because usually you can tell if you like someone or you dislike them. But as I said, even the movies that I've disliked of this guy, there are moments that I've really, really liked. And so coming into The Forest of Love, it really was a lottery. I didn't know whether I was going to like this one. And so it was on Netflix. It really wasn't much of a risk. So my expectations were lowered. But again, because of Shion Sono, because he does have such great moments in all of his films, there was a level of excitement there. So what was I going to get in The Forest of Love? Was I going to get a movie that was going to be a huge letdown? Or was I going to get a film that was going to be like Cold Fish and Why Don't You Play in Hell? And ultimately, the result of this film is another disappointment. I have to say it. I will say that once again, there are very likeable qualities to this movie, which is the reason why it's disappointing, is because the consistency is not there, and the movie once again gets lost in self-indulgence. Now, I will say that the positives to the film is that it is very well made, and it is a movie that does document the thought-provoking topic of violence. Now, this is not quite as creative as Shion Sono will make you believe. Is that if you've seen the film Why Don't You Play in Hell, it does touch on a very similar concept, is that this is violence through behind a camera. Now, in Why Don't You Play in Hell, that was my favourite film of his. That was a brilliant movie, and that was a movie about these kids who were documenting a Yakuza war between two clans. And so that was a film that made you think about violence and the desensitization to violence. And this movie is very, very similar. So if you haven't seen Why Don't You Play in Hell, you will see this concept as something new and something that really hasn't been depicted before. But so this is basically the best part of the Forest of Love, is ultimately the thought-provoking concept of violence, and being behind a camera is almost like you're desensitizing yourself to it. You're disconnecting yourself from reality. So you're watching movies, we watch social media, your news outlets, it's getting more and more violent, therefore, violent video games. And so violence is all around us, and violence is starting to corrode our mentality as how we look at violence. And if you're behind a camera, as is the case with these aspiring filmmakers, when they're seeing horrible things done behind the camera, it's not really hitting them hard. But when they realise that they have to come to terms with this on a reality sense, then it does hit them very hard. And this is the vulnerabilities that this manipulative man really starts to play on. And so before they know it, they've passed that point of no return. They can't get out of this situation, and all of a sudden they're seeing violence for what it really is. And that's by far the most interesting concept to this film, and it's the reason why I would say at least go out there and watch it, is because it is something that's going to make you think. So that is One of the positives, another positive is that it is a very extreme film. It's very violent and it's very brutal in its situations that occur. And it's not overly graphic as far as gore is concerned, but there are very gory moments. But it's just the pain and reality of this violence. It's very ugly. It's showing violence for what it is. And this is something that Sion Sono does very well. You've got Takashi Miike, on the other hand, that does caricature his violence to a degree that it is over the top and it is a different dimension. Whereas Sion Sono, he has that similar sort of craziness, but his violence is downplayed to a level that it's very barbaric and very, very realistic. And so be careful. There are scenes in this movie that are going to really disturb some viewers. This is a very twisted romance film as well. So not only a movie about violence and the disconnection from violence, but it's also a very twisted romance amongst very quirky characters. And so the colouring of the film was very vibrant. And as I said, you've got a strong level of ugliness that really complicates the situation. So there are some set pieces that are very well handled, and that was something that once again is the reason why I'm really up in the air as far as whether or not I like this director. So that they are the positives to the film, but ultimately the negatives outweigh the positives because of the fact it goes for 2.5 hours. Now, I believe that I could be completely wrong, but for me, I get the feeling that Sion Sono makes really long films to try and give him that particular style. Now, what I mean by that, you've got Takashi Miike, you've got Michael Haneke, Gaspar Noé, Lars von Trier. These are directors where you watch a film and you will know it's the director without even being told it's that director. So, for example, we're seeing an M. Night Shyamalan film. He has his own very distinct style. So you don't need to be told it's an M. Night Shyamalan film. You just need to watch it and you know that it's his style. And then not a lot of directors can do this. And I believe that Sion Sono, he does have his own style. It is crazy, but what separates him is that his movies are very long. And I just think as the movies feel as though they haven't been edited very well, is that there's a lot of filler to his films. Now that could be a deliberate ploy. And I just don't think that ploy works, is because it does go over the line from art house to self-indulgence. There's a lot of filler in this movie. It's just going around and around in circles without really progressing. It's like it's buffering. So you've got one particular scene that just kind of goes nowhere, and it's like 15%, 30%, 90%. Then it goes forward. Then all of a sudden it starts to buffer again. So it's that stop, start. And when it goes for 2.5 hours, that stop, start mannerism that the film has does become very, very distracting. And I was checking out well before the end. So that was really a massive negative that really halted the enjoyment of this movie, if enjoyment is the right word. You've also got characters that were very all over the place. Now, the characters weren't overly likeable, and so you've got flashback scenes where you're supposed to get a little bit more depth to these characters, but there's just no interest there. And I think the reason why there was no real interest is because you can never really connect to these people, is because the tone is all over the place. The tone is very inconsistent. At 1 minute, the movie wants to be very serious, but in the next minute, you've got the characters who are acting so over the top that it feels like a cartoon. So when you've got a cartoon world colliding with a real world, it just doesn't gel together. As I said, it makes it a very crazy experience, but that craziness I just don't really think works, is because the glue doesn't keep the structure together. It just falls completely flat, and ultimately it just is a movie that you feel very, very uncertain with. It just felt like a movie that you're visually experiencing as opposed to experiencing on an emotional level that would make the violence and make that thought-provoking sort of material and the concepts even better. And so it doesn't really hit home. It just feels like a very superficial experience, and it's an experience that doesn't really know what it wants to be, and ultimately it comes across as self-indulgence. It's an effort to create a style, but unfortunately it's a style that's just not really going to gravitate to a lot of people, and me especially. So that was the biggest criticism. It is very difficult to get through, is because it doesn't really seem to go anywhere. The characters, the tone of the whole film is all over the place. It's nasty, and sometimes it's funny, and I know that, throwing a lot of genres in there can make a very warped and surreal experience, but it's a surreal experience in the way that you're confused, and you just, as I said, you don't know what direction this film wants to go in. Crazy can be good, but unfortunately, The Forest of Love is done in a crazy way that's unfortunately in the negative. So it's definitely not a movie I would recommend. I was looking at my watch well before the end. 2.5 hours is way too long. It needed to be edited a lot more, and so to allow the continuity of the film to go at a more fluent level. So unfortunately, it's just disjointed. The tone is all over the place. The characters are not very interesting. So a film that goes for this long is ultimately a chore to get through. So yeah, as I said, definitely not coming recommended. I was disappointing. There are likeable qualities, but unfortunately it doesn't hold together. Therefore, I'm going to give The Forest of Love 1.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies and I'll see you there.